Right. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this e-leadership forum organized by RICS with support from Colliers International and Duff & Phelps. We are, of course, especially thankful to Dr. MS Sahu, Chairperson, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, for taking time out from his busy schedule to address us today. I will introduce my fellow panelists first. We've got Mr. Ben Elder, who is Director for Global Valuation Standards for RICS. He is based in London. We've got Mr. Varun Gupta. He is the India Practice Leader for Duff & Phelps, with a responsibility for Asia Pacific region. And we've got Mr. Ajay Sharma, who's the Managing Director for Valuation Practice for Colliers International. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and especially to the attendees to take out time. We are aware that during this time there are a lot of things on your plate, but we are especially thankful to you for taking out time. Now, I just want to set a brief context before, of course, I hand over, to Dr. Sahu, who you'd be so eager to listen to. But I think some context is necessary to begin. As we are all aware, the economies world over are experiencing significant disruption, and the valuation profession is no different. It's facing similar challenges. We at the RICS responded by issuing detailed coronavirus practice guidelines and alerts for RICS regulated valuers worldwide. This best practice guidance, by the way, can be referred to on our website by all RICS and non-RICS professionals. So it's available to all. And we will cover the disruption part and the impact and the future of this profession during our panel discussion scheduled later for today's session. What's interesting that it's been that globally there has been a negative impact of this disruption on economies and people's lives and businesses. However, I'd like you to rewind a few short weeks, and I'm sure you would find that disruption was the prevailing buzzword, and looked more or less in a positive light with the potential to bring lasting change, modernization, and efficiency for businesses. And similarly, recently there has been a lot of discussion with valuation professionals expressing, reservations around the draft valuers bill. And I'd like to quote something from the document that has been put out for consultation by the IBBI. This bill, I say quote unquote, this bill is an attempt to put forward the least disruptive yet modern and robust institutional framework that learns from the experience of valuation profession in India and abroad, and of other professions in India, while addressing the concerns of today and tomorrow, and ensuring respectability for valuation professionals and accountability for valuation services. I personally have been a part of the committee of experts that was constituted last August for this process, along with my fellow panelist, Mr. Varun Gupta. Of course, our sincere gratitude to Dr. Sahu and the entire team at IBBI for their support and untiring commitment to serve and protect the interests of the valuer community and development of the profession. Without taking much time, I'd like to invite Dr. Sahu to deliver his keynote address. We had asked the attendees to send their questions, and I'd like to mention here that we've passed on some of your common questions to Dr. Sahu, and he's kindly consented to address them as part of the address. Over to you, sir, and thank you once again for giving us your time.
Thank you, Mr. Kapoor. Thanks to RICS for hosting this e-leadership forum and providing me an opportunity to speak to you. Let me first disclose my interest. IBBI is the authority currently under the valuation rules, which is an interim arrangement till something regular comes up. So both IBBI and I, we are working as guest artists for the valuation profession. For the time being, we are doing the hand-holding, but the profession should move ahead, having its own independent institutional arrangement, and that is what the committee of experts has precisely recommended. My second interest is that I am a user of valuation services. When I need medical services, I must find a person who is competent, who is authorized, and who is accountable for medical services. Similarly, when I need valuation services, I should find someone who is competent, who is authorized, and who is accountable for valuation services. This means that I am interested in a valuation professional who gets due respect of the society as a doctor or chartered accountant gets, and who is accountable for his services as a doctor or chartered accountant is, to ensure that the users of valuation services have minimum quality assurance. Let me give an example where I use valuation services. It is in insolvency proceedings. There is a requirement that in a corporate insolvency resolution process, two registered valuers will conduct a valuation of a company to arrive at the fair value and liquidation value of that company. And these are not prices which market discovers, and nobody has means to know what the price or market value is. But we expect the valuer to produce a value which is more authentic than the price itself. In a sense, a valuer competes with the most powerful creation of man, that is the market. Market discovers a price, and we construe that price is the most authentic value of a product. But market at times can go wrong for more than one reason, but we expect a valuer must not be. The valuer should produce a value which is more authentic than the price discovered by the market. This only illustrates the kind of competence a valuer must have and the institutional requirement to produce such valuers. In corporate insolvency resolution process, a valuer gives us a value of the company in distress, and keeping that value as a reference, the committee of creditors compares how much the market is willing to pay to take over the company or to discharge the obligations of the claimants. So we get a value from the market sources, which could be a good value or bad value, but we have got a more authentic value from the valuers, and we are comparing these two for a decision making whether to accept or reject a resolution plan. We may reject the plan, resulting in the liquidation of the company, or let the company live by accepting the proposal. But this decision is highly dependent on the value a valuer has given. If a valuer gives an inappropriate value, then it is possible that we close a viable company or we rescue an unviable company, both of which are detrimental to the economy. And that is the importance of a valuer in a market economy, and this is my interest in valuation profession. Let me talk a bit about the history of this profession. It has a history of about a century in India. We have different statutes: banking law, securities law, taxation law, company law, insolvency law, and many others. They require valuation for a variety of purposes. Each statute, acting as a separate island, focuses on what needs to be valued, who can render valuation services, and the manner of such valuation. Several self-regulating organizations have come up. They have generally tried to build expertise of their members to meet the needs of users. Each of these, acting as a separate island, promotes the interest of their respective members. Such islands on both sides of demand and supply, most of which are too small and lack capacity and motivation, have not engendered a holistic development of the profession. And since anyone and everyone could join the island, the academic interest in the profession has been very limited. Many valuers have come and told me that they have enough work, but they do not get the respect from the society as other professionals get. Similarly, many users of valuation services have come and told me that they get a valuation done from a valuer, and based on that, they undertake a transaction. For example, they give a loan based on valuation of a security which has been valued by a valuer. When there's a default and the security interest is realized, it is then realized that the valuation was not appropriate. Some people say that some part of the NPAs in the country have origin in wrong or inappropriate valuations. Imagine now the consequences of inappropriate valuation. I just mentioned about that. A viable company could be liquidated based on an inappropriate valuation. Further, every valuer gives a unique valuation of the same asset using a unique approach. If every valuer gives a different value by using different approaches in the same circumstance, a customer is really worse off with a valuation. And the valuer who has done a professional job, who has arrived at the right valuation, he may find it difficult to defend his position. So accountability and liability of the valuers is compromised severely. And it becomes difficult to compare the values of two assets as these have been arrived by different valuers following different approaches. To address these kinds of issues, a need has been felt for long to have an institutional framework for regulation and development of the valuation profession, given its increasing role in a market economy which India has adopted for the last 3 decades. Several attempts have been made in the past to have a framework, starting with the expert group set up in 2003. There is also an expert committee in 2005. The Companies Bill 2008 made a provision for this bill, went to Parliament. Draft valuation bills made in 2008, a complete bill was prepared. Companies Bill 2009 also provided for this. And Companies Act 2013, Section 247 very clearly provided for this. And further deliberations, Company Law Committee of 2016, etc. But today we have valuation rules issued in 2017 under the Companies Act. This provides a comprehensive framework for development and regulation of the profession of valuations. Valuations required under the Companies Act and Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. All this history of work acknowledges that the valuation profession deserves respect in the committee of professions, while the users of valuation services need the reassurance that they are assured of a minimum quality of valuation services. With the 2017 valuers rules in place, we made a beginning, covered some distance. The next logical step is to have full respectability of the profession and full statutory recognition. The committee of experts studied all past attempts over the last 2 decades, particularly the Valuation Bill 2008. It studied also the development, regulation of every other profession, chartered accountancy, company secretary, cost accountancy, medical science, law in the country. It studied also valuations professions in other countries, comparable ones like Malaysia, New Zealand, of course, America, USA and the UK. It studied also the history of a regulatory framework of professions, starting from Hammurabi Code, which is 5,000-year-old prescription how to regulate professions. Then 5,000 years ago, it emphasized that the society's interest must be kept above the interest of a professional. And if a professional abuses his rights or privileged position, he should be liable for penal consequences. We also studied the history of fit and proper person in a profession. We are particularly aware that the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, when he applied for a license to practice as an advocate in South Africa, in 1964 Advocates Act of 1964 of South Africa, then it required that a person must be a fit and proper person. And when he applied, a resistance came that the then Law Society registered that he was an Indian origin and as such not a fit and proper person, but that did of course hold good. We also studied the contemporary thought in design of a regulatory framework, particularly the work of Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission, Competition Law Reforms Commission, the high-powered committee of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs that studied the disciplinary framework of three professions: company secretary, chartered accountant, post accountant, Justice Sri Krishna Committee on the profession of company secretaries, and most importantly, the latest one, the National Medical Commission Act of 2019, which regulates one of the very large and most important profession in the country, which discarded an old model and accepted a new model in the form of a National Medical Commission Act. We also took note of what is on the ground. We had long discussions with stakeholders, all registered valuer organizations. We held several rounds of roundtable discussions, online consultations, and we have devised an institutional framework that hopefully meets the needs of the profession and is least disruptive, as Mr. Kapoor laid out. But yet, it is only a view. Government has to take the final view after considering the comments of the stakeholders. And this is where, in fact, my request is that all of you should participate in this consultation process so that we really get a regulatory framework which we deserve. Let me respond to some of the issues that Mr. Kapoor has asked me to deal with. Committee took a view, but it's not that it is a very rigid view. For example, committee tried to balance the interest of users with that of the professionals. There's a feedback that there are actually, in fact, there are feedback of both sides. One set of users say that they deserve better protection. They have not been the users of valuation services. They say that they need a higher protection in the law. Their interests should be protected more. While the professionals feel that they need a better protection. So both feel that the other has got a better protection. Without taking a view who is right, let me state the facts what the committee has done. The bill in its long title states the objectives. Objective is establishment of an institute. And why do we establish an institute? It is to promote the development of the profession of valuers, to regulate the profession of valuers, to regulate the market for valuation services, and to regulate market to protect the interests of users of valuation services in India. Why do we regulate and develop all the things we do ultimately to protect the interest of the users? Usually market develops fast. In anywhere, I am more familiar with the financial market, regulation follows. But growth becomes fast and robust only if there is a regulatory framework. In financial markets, when derivatives market came for the first time, transactions took place, but volumes were not good. Liquidity price efficiency was not good. But market grew only when a regulatory framework was put in place. Development and regulation go hand in hand. You cannot regulate something unless there is development. And if there is no valuation profession, there can be no regulation. And regulation can only come when a profession starts developing. But without regulation, the development cannot happen, cannot be sustained. Development happens in the comfort of a regulation. Development happens only when stakeholders want to use it, and they will use it only when there's a reassurance that they would get just and quality service and they will not be exploited. The long title of this bill, like any other, let me give the example of Institute of Company Secretary of India, one of the closest professions having a relatively modern framework. It is in 1980. It states that this is an act to promote the development of and to regulate the profession of company secretaries. So the standard approach has been to create a regulatory body with the twin responsibility of development and regulation. But why do we regulate and develop? It is to not to create work for professionals. It is to serve the clients and the society. If I quote something we quoted in the report, Lionel Browning, right to regulate practice comes from the right of the people to protect themselves. A primary function of the state is to protect the interest of consumers. All modern statutes, at least in India, since the market economy liberalized in 1992, all statutes like the SEBI Act, Security and Exchange Board of India Act, is an act to establish the SEBI to protect the interests of investors in securities and to develop and regulate, etc. IRDAI Act is to protect the interests of holders of insurance policies. The PFRDA Act is to protect the interest of subscribers to schemes of pension fund. Competition Commission of India Act, Competition Act is to protect the interest of consumers. And if you read the National Medical Commission Act 2019, which has a very long title, long title, that reads in many words, all focuses only on the protection of the users of medical services. And you cannot protect the interest of users without holding professionals accountable for their services. So the draft bill endeavors to balance the interest of users and professionals. Chapter 4 of the report, para 4.2 to 4.8 in particular, explains the rationale of a regulation of valuation of profession. There's a feeling that why profession has to be regulated. The economists believe, and to that group I belong, that regulations are necessary only to address market failure and nothing beyond that. Market failure arises precisely for three reasons, namely information asymmetry, market power, and externalities. I don't want to be academic. Take the instance of information asymmetry. The user of a valuation services, he has no information about the capability of a person, whether Mr. X can provide valuation services. How does he know that yes, this Mr. X has the ability to provide valuation services? He has no information, and wherever he has information, he can't assess himself that a particular person is good, bad, capable, correct, antecedents are good. Valuation, like any other professional service, being an experience good. Until he uses, he can't know its quality. So to address this problem of information asymmetry, the user knows much less than the provider of a service. The law normally provides an entry norm to the profession. Only those who have these required qualification and experience, they can render valuation services. Then I know this person is holding a piece of paper. That gives me confidence, and that is why I want to regulate him. This is, I'm not elaborating everything. This is why regulation is required. And if you feel that having an entry norm to the profession is excessive, I am sorry, I can't agree. I have no argument to that. So every profession has an entry norm, and I don't consider this is excessive. What does the bill give? It enables a user to file any information with the regulator if he has a grievance and complaint. This is the only protection, though bill talks about in the long title at 4th or 5th place, the objective is to protect the interest of consumers. It protects the interest of consumers by making entry norms, by putting disclosure requirements, and it gives one right to him that you can file an information with the regulator, and the regulator can take action if it is approved by following the due process. And that is the only protection an user has under the law. I don't think that is also excessive. But in lieu of this right of the user to file an information, Section 51 mandates that only a registered valuer and none else can practice valuation profession. This kind of a monopoly position is given to Mr. X because we want him to behave responsibly. So only the people who meet the minimum standards, qualification, conduct, etc., etc., for them this area is reserved. Only the consideration is that if a consumer is unhappy, he can give a complaint. Look at even the Architects Act, such an old act that also does not reserve the entire work for architects. A person who is not registered as architect can also provide the services. So this goes to that extent to protect the turf of the valuation profession. And then it also protects the valuer from all frivolous allegations or harassment. It says that there is an adjudicating panel which will decide the matter. Of course, that will happen after a rigorous process. There is a fact-finding process. There will be a so-called notice. So-called notice will be disposed by a panel following the principles of natural justice. There will be a provision of appeal, and the regulator has a separate administrative law department which is insulated from executive and legislative wings of the organization. But even that adjudicating panel of 2 adjudicating officers, they will not examine the merits of a valuation. The bill explicitly says that this is a matter of opinion. Valuation is a matter of opinion. It cannot, its merits cannot be examined unless someone proves that the valuer has acted mala fide. And that is the kind of protection. And I don't think also the protection for valuers is excessive. They need this much protection. So when we balanced, we felt what is protection required for valuer, what is required for user, and we don't think we have given over protection either to user or to valuer. Another related aspect is that about the penal provisions. Some feel that these are draconian, excessive, while others feel that this is very lenient, very light. In fact, these are all matters of views. You can't say what is right, it is only balancing something. So again, without taking the sides, let me understand the provision. Section 41, subsection 4. That says that has divided, the law has divided various kinds of offences into 4 schedules. 2 schedule 1 is a minor offence of valuer, schedule B is a major offence for valuer. Then there are offences for valuer organizations, valuer institutes. For them, the penalty amount is huge in crores. Sometimes people confuse that penalty is also for valuers. The 2 crore penalty, wherever it is prescribed, it is for valuer institute, not for valuer. So please don't confuse that. Valuers penalties are prescribed in 41.4 and I think 41.5 probably. It says that wherever valuer has done something, the punishment is warning. Depending on the gravity, it can be warning, it can be reprimand, it can be a direction to improve your quality, cease and desist, restriction on rendering valuation service for a certain period, disgorge unlawful law may again made. If you have made unlawful money, give it back. These things are read out: warning, reprimand, improvement capability, cease, desist, restriction for a certain period, and disgorgement. Any of these are no penalty in fact. The next comes monetary penalty, which can be up to 2 lakh or 3 times the amount of loss or gain you have made, or suspension for a period of 6 months. In extreme grave cases, the penalty can go up to 10 lakh and cancellation of registration. There is no profession in the world, the highest punishment is cancellation of registration. And there is no profession in the world where the regulator cannot, shall not cancel the registration of a professional. So this is no excessive, but it is not that this has to happen after following natural justice, application of mind by 2 people, 2 layers of appeal, but then there is an overarching law in any country, is that the law of proportionality. Section 40, section 40, I think, that says that the adjudicating officer panel shall consider the nature and serious of the alleged contravention, including whether it was deliberate, reckless, negligent. If deliberate, mala fide, naturally you attract a higher punishment. If it is not that deliberate, it will be on the lower side, even of the range permissible 10 lakh or 2 lakh. And it has to consider the consequences of impact of the alleged violation, whether he has taken any unfair advantage, whether he has avoided any loss. More importantly, what has been the conduct of the person after the occurrence of the alleged contravention and prior to the contravention. Has he changed his behavior? So I don't think it is either excessive, also it is not lenient, because it has to be proportionate. If somebody argues that you have been lenient to valuers, no, it is proportionate. Proportionate one has to go by, that is a fundamental law of the land. But I would step back and ask myself, should I ask the authorities to give a lower penalty for the offense I have done, or should I say that I will not commit offense? I don't think it gives credibility to a professional. He says that I will commit offense, but please give me lower penalty. This is not acceptable. You can't say that I will keep on murdering people, but give me a penalty of 1 year imprisonment. That's not acceptable. Proportionality rule has to be there, and there has to be application of mind. Another set of questions have come up about permitting the companies, foreign firms, big firms, or it's saying that the bill has favored companies, foreign and big valuation firms. Today, bill does not exist. Bill is a proposal for future. But today, there are companies, foreign firms, big valuation firms. So where does the bill favor them? They are existing today. If these are there today and users are using their services, why should the bill prohibit them? Are they, right question is, are they adding any value? If yes, why should we penalize ourselves by prohibiting them? They are there because both business and profession, these are becoming complex, beyond the capability of an individual in certain cases to meet the vast and complex needs of a client fully, whilst often client looks for one-stop solution for his needs. The question should be, are they doing anything illegal? If they are following law and giving the service, if you penalize them, if they are doing illegal, penalize them. Otherwise, denying somebody is essentially denying something for the user who wants a better quality of service. Can I say that let's say that the fear that Indian firms may not be able to compete is wholly misplaced. We had such fear for decades. We told monopoly is bad, foreign investment is bad, foreign company is bad. But all these have proved futile over the last 30 years, and our country is growing today, forgetting about COVID, from 92 to 2020, 27 years at a stretch, it has grown at a rate which is more than double the average growth rate India had from independence from 47 to 1992. So I don't think it is right approach to deny something to someone just because it is a company, it is big, or it is a foreign firm. Do we say that we will not buy a shirt from a company, buy a shirt, if it is produced by a big company or a foreign company? So let me make clear that while the entire rationale has been given, the bill has no provision to either promote or discourage anyone. It provides a level playing field, competitive environment for valuers to compete at marketplace. And it's not that there is no place for a small person, small firm. Market is huge. Everybody can't afford all kinds of things. Market needs services from 0 to infinity. Similarly, professionals are there also from 0 to infinity. In every profession, there are individual professionals, there are law firms, individual advocates, chartered accountants firms, individual chartered accountants firms. For everyone, there is a place, but it has to be competitive. So the bill allows body corporates and entities to provide valuation services. This is in vogue today under the valuation rules. This is nothing new. Yes, the expert group as early as in 2003 had recommended recognition of firms and companies as valuers. The Standing Committee on Finance, which had examined the Companies Bill 2019, in its 21st report in 2019 recommended that firms or body corporates having professionals such as chartered accountants, company secretaries also should be registered as valuers, and even they went one step further saying that they should allow multi-professionals, multidisciplinary firms. SEBI allows today merchant bankers to valuation. There are most of them are companies. In several foreign jurisdictions, the professionals form professional services corporations for rendering services. The firms and companies are allowed to practice valuation in many jurisdictions. And as I told, the rationale for valuations, allowing individuals, allowing firms, allowing companies, is elaborated in Chapter 4, Para 4.33 to 4.41. However, the bill makes provisions to retain the professional character of the service. A partnership firm or company is registered as a valuer only if its primary objective is providing valuation services. All its partners and directors are eligible to be valuer. Majority of its partners, whole-time directors, are valuers having a certificate of practice. None of these partners is a valuer in another partnership firm, and it has at least one partner director who is a valuer of the asset class for which the entity is recognized. As regards the subsidiaries, there was a difference of opinion in the committee of experts. The COC did not take a view. Probably we could have had another meeting, we could not have because of the COVID kind of things. So we decided not to either, let's not prohibit a subsidiary from becoming a valuer, or let's not provide explicitly that they should be eligible to be a valuer. It is left to the wisdom of the National Institute of Valuers to allow a subsidiary, as and when it considers appropriate, to serve as a valuer subject to such safeguards as may be specified that preserves the professional character of the valuation service. The next aspect is about, there has been some clarity required about the, as I told, it has to be disruptive. It has to move whatever is available on the ground and not discard the things. It takes onto the, like every law, advocacy law, company sector law, every law that has come in the country for the first time has always made a transitional arrangement. It has tried to accommodate existing people who have been practicing, whether their qualifications, whether somebody had a LLB degree for an advocate, whether somebody had a compensatory degree to be a company secretary. So there has been a transitional arrangement. In every profession it happens, medical science, everywhere it happens. You have to take with you. So the people who are registered today under the company's valuation rules, they will be taken as registered under the new rule. That is the proposal. Of course, it is all subject to change. Valuers who have qualifications, the law provides the qualifications in section 49D, who have qualifications and are doing practice qualifications as specified in that table. They can take the examination of the respective asset class, complete the specified hours of training, and then get registration. Those valuers who do not have experience but are practicing today, experience is given there, still they can also become valuers after taking a little longer program, which we call in a little limited valuation program, and then also become valuer. These two routes, those who are practicing, having qualification and not having qualification, these have a sunset clause of 2 years or 3 years. Again, nothing rigid on that. One can make it 5 years, one can make it 2 years. This has to be as far as possible on the ground, but this can't remain open forever. The individuals who have a qualification not in evaluation can do a 2-year program. Students after higher secondary can do a 5-year program. Like law today, one does 5-year law program, 3-year LLB program. This is 4-year and 2-year programs going forward. But it cannot be, some people feel that this transitory arrangement should be permanent arrangement. In that case, we are not really moving, we are not taking the profession to the next level. Some have also told that because like you do not have somebody who does practice with a doctor or an advocate, becomes a doctor or advocate after 5 years of experience. He has to have the required qualification. There is a view that cost considerations all cannot afford in Indian context. Yes, there is IIT education, there is a medical education, there is a management education. It's not that all can afford, but there is an arrangement to ensure that scholarship loan, no meritorious student is turned away from IIT or IIM. There is a way to give him financial support to complete the course. There was some clarification was sought about whether some person can be in employment and practice, or what is the arrangement. It is as it is in any other profession, like its company secretary, like the advocate. To do practice, you can be registered as a valuer, but if you want to do practice, you need a certificate of practice. And that certificate of practice will be issued to a person who is not in employment. That means to be registered, you don't need to be, there's no prohibition, you can be in employment and yet be registered. When you want to practice, quit employment, take certificate of practice. When you want to start employment, surrender certificate of practice, take up employment. And the whole-time directors of valuer firms will not be considered employment for this purpose. So certificate of practice will be issued, renewed, withdrawn, surrender, all these things will be there. So employment, one can be in employment, that is the provision. Today also we have made in insolvency profession. One can get in, get out of the profession, or get in, get out of employment. There are many other things which the bill has left it quite flexible. That means these have to be dealt as the situation comes. Law says that as of now there are 3 asset classes. But what is the scope of each asset class? That can be increased or decreased. New asset classes can be added and subtracted as the National Institute of Valuer feels. Today law says that to start with, make it compulsory for IBC and Companies Act. You want to cover some other law, please go ahead, add it. You do not want to go there, stick only to this. Everything is flexible. Ideally, this framework should be good enough that everybody wants to come under this framework, because this will give the ultimate respectability. But there is no compulsion on the day one. So all leaves flexibility, and because it believes that it has to be a gradual manner, it has to be least disruptive manner. As I just mentioned that the committee of experts followed one best practice, that is it made a recommendation in its report that the regulators should follow a best practice of making regulations. That best practice is go through a public consultation, make a cost benefit analysis, etc., etc. This committee of experts has demonstrated the use of public consultation in developing the institutional framework. Very extensive consultation we have done. Government is doing consultation now, but there is a problem with this consultative approach also. At times, extensive consultation can create an opportunity for some set of organized vocal interest groups to have excessive influence over the outcomes, while the large majority who feel they are not affected, they keep quiet, or because they are not organized, they don't participate. In the process, a small set makes a noise, policy is distorted. So it is therefore desirable that every stakeholder, even those who are finding it good, those who are not finding it good, those who find that there is a scope for improvement, you must participate, give your views, so that you get a professional framework, institutional framework that you really deserve. This is all that I wanted to talk. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Kapoor.
Absolutely, sir. It was our pleasure to hear such thoughts from you. And in fact, what I'm very certain what you've been able to do is to actually issue clarifications on a number of issues which the valuation fraternity has been grappling with in terms of understanding of the bill. So thank you for taking out time for us. We'd now like to continue to the panel discussions. Dr. Sahu will be leaving us, but the panel discussion will be distributed in two parts. We'd start with the understanding the impact of the COVID-19 disruption on valuation as a profession, and then come to some of the points in the new valuers bill. A lot of them, of course, have been clarified by Dr. Sahu, and I have a number of audience questions that we'd like to take up if we have the time remaining. So addressing directly to the panel now, Ben, Varun, and Ajay. I think, as I mentioned earlier, this has been something that nobody is prepared for. I don't think anybody's business continuity planning had any sort of planning done for a disruption like this. So from your respective positions, let me start with Ben. Ben, if I were to ask you a macro question, what do you see, or what do you consider would be the short and long-term implications of this disruption on the profession?
Thank you, Nitin, and thank you, Dr. Sahu. It's a really insightful presentation and covered a lot of the things which are really, really important to the profession. But turning to your comments, Nitin, I'm lucky enough to have a global perspective, and as you said, the impact has been unimaginable, and yet we've all rallied and we've found solutions to many of the problems. And that's what we do as professionals. Very much of what Dr. Sahu was indicating there is the ability to not be bound by rules, but be bound by principles, which can lead to decisions continuing. The lack of data has been the big challenge to the valuation profession. We're very often accused of looking backwards for values. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has proved that valuers don't look backwards for their comparable evidence. When we look back, we're looking for evidence of what a market has paid for a flow of benefits into the future. And that's why the process. But we're always looking forward. And after the pandemic, and particularly in the UK, when we had the lockdown and other countries had the lockdown, that something had happened, and all the comparable evidence which was yesterday no longer applied, and there weren't any transactions for people to actually measure what the value was at that point. So we've had to look for different types of evidence. And so we've been following the stock markets, we've been following the sales, retail sales, people's behaviours. Because again, value is driven by what people do and how they act within the marketplace. So the positives out of this is that it's reinforced the position of the valuer to look forward and to capture data from a wide sector of sources. When there's reasonable amount of evidence available, that valuation is sometimes considered easy. It's never easy. It's not supposed to be easy. It's a difficult profession. We have to come to our judgments. We have to be able to tell the story about why we've moved from the instructions through the data gathering, through the application of a methodology, to the report, to create this linear story which we can justify our decisions at every point if challenged. And I think that's part of what Dr. Sahu was indicating was included in the bill. Short-term retail sales have obviously been hit tremendously hard. So there's going to be some changes in behaviour around retail sector. I've not been out of my house for the last 8 weeks. We're lucky enough to have a garden, so I've been in the garden, but actually we've not been outside of the boundary of our house for that period. And the right way we survived is by having deliveries, vegetables all delivered, and so there's a whole process around logistics which has revolutionised what's actually happening. Give it its title or its general title of internet shopping. But I've bought everything from a new lawnmower through to pints of milk to even something to cut my hair because it was getting so long I had to buy a clipper. But all available, and it's all arrived. And I've been talking to the valuers, particularly in the UK, and whilst the retail values are falling, the logistics, the warehouses have actually appeared, there's more demand for them. So I'm trying not to say increased in value because the evidence isn't actually there yet. But
yep.
The valuers have got to follow the procedures and what's happening.
Yeah.
I'll be quiet there, otherwise I'll take all the time.
No problem. I think I was just going to comment that yes, I think the logistics and warehousing sector, of course, if I may use that word, they've been much more resilient, and of course they've been thrown into the spotlight there. But coming to Varun here first, so Varun, what briefly, what's your perception really or reading of this situation in terms of the short and long term implications for this profession?
Sure, thanks. Can you hear me clearly, Nathan?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. So first of all, let me just say a few words of appreciation for Dr. Sahu. Very, very clear and concise summary of the lot of work that went into the committee of experts report, and clearly you can see how clear his vision is for the profession. I think that's a very good thing for us going forward. Coming to your question around how COVID might impact the valuation profession in the short and long term. See, in the short term, what I think is that the level of uncertainty as regards the future stream of cash flows has certainly gone up because a lot of business models are getting disrupted. The demand that we had anticipated has gone down. I mean, for example, if you look at the consensus forecasts of the large organizations like IMF, the World Bank, and other economic organizations that predict how much the world will grow in a certain year, they were predicting a growth of about 2.6% for the entire world. This is, as late as in December last year. This was the growth for the year 2020. And more recently, once the COVID outbreak has happened, they have revised their forecasts to a negative 2.5% growth. So clearly there's been a massive drop in growth expectations, and this will have an impact in value. It also means that some of the approaches that we've been adopting, like looking at the market approach to figure out what is the value of the subject company, those approaches will probably need to be looked at a little bit more carefully, because we believe that the markets are also currently grappling with what is the right price. There is a fair amount of information asymmetry in the market. So therefore, the reliance on probably management's view of how their business will evolve and how their business will cope with the situation will have to be incorporated a little bit more than what we were doing earlier. There was a much greater reliance on the market approach, but in a situation like this, I think there should be probably a greater reliance on the income approach and what management has to say, because that helps to deal with the information asymmetry that the market is dealing with right now. However, in the long term, I don't think the approaches or the methodologies that we are adopting, those are going to change. The valuation profession will come back to the same level of or the same approaches that have been adopted in the past. Whether this takes 6 months to happen, whether it takes a year to happen, but we will revert to the same approaches and methodologies.
Great. I think that's a very, very, very positive thing to listen. Ajay, I'd like to approach, to you with a different question. When we were speaking earlier, about doing this.
Nathan, cannot hear you.
And then, finally, what do you see as an impact on future projections?
Sorry, Nitin, I lost you completely for the entire question.
Okay, sorry. Let me repeat that question very quickly. So I was saying, when we were speaking, we talked about the risk perception for investors. Okay. So how are, in your opinion, valuers such as your firm, and your clients are handling this changed risk perception? And, are you seeing any impact on discount rates, being used for future projections as well?
Yeah. So I think Varun addressed a part of that question, right? So
yes.
Like looking at the projections, what the management actually represents as their cash flow predictability going forward. So and today, given this is a very unprecedented situation we are all in, and almost you do not have benchmarks to actually compare this kind of an impact that has had on the overall companies or asset classes that we are talking about. So it kind of becomes a little tricky to understand, whether these projections that the clients are giving works or not. And therefore, you have to be extremely careful in how you gauge your discount rates, your capitalization rates, and also, more importantly, in business valuations is how you look at your control country or the company-specific risk premiums that you're allocating, because we all know the fact that today, given the situation, the kind of liquidity the governments are pumping in, the risk-free rates are going south. In certain cases, they are also touching negative rates in some European countries. So essentially, what happens is your impact on the discount rate to the capital model computation actually comes down. And if that is so, then you need to really be looking at the management's representation of cash flows very, very carefully and see whether the probability of that can happen or not. So one of the recommendations that we generally tell clients is that you build multiple scenarios. You build 3 to 4 scenarios and actually look at those scenarios and try to attribute certain weightages to the scenario, so that what's happening is that you're actually looking at a very risky situation to a very optimistic situation, and probably you're trying to manage the risks that are there in the representation from the company that are coming on board. So that's something that we do, and even the clients are looking for that, because they also want to understand what are the risk scenarios that they are looking at, the predictions they're making. For example, Ben was rightly touched upon, certain asset classes like warehousing and for example, warehousing, they're doing really well, given the fact that e-commerce has really taken a very, very upward curve. We also have, for example, asset classes like hotels, and hotels today are offering significant discounts. So the occupancies are on uptake, but that does not really mean that, like in previous years, when you see occupancy going up, you see the ARRs or the RevPARs actually also firming up. But today you're actually seeing that the occupancy uptake is in inverse relation to the ARR or the RevPAR, because in order to maintain the sale of the rooms, they're actually compromising on the revenue. So if you were to value asset class like hotel, then you need to be really careful as to look at these relationships between various assumptions you're making, and then based on that take a very informed call on the discount rates.
Sorry, it seems I muted myself. Thanks for that clarity, Ajay. Ben, from the international perspective, really, what are you, seeing in terms of your exposure to various geographies? There are, of course, markets like China, which are well on their way, I hesitatingly use that word normalcy, because I think we're all looking at a new normal going forward. But how are some of the other geographies responding to these situations?
Yeah, thank you, Nitin. Yeah, it is a different picture globally, and when you think it's such a short time, and the UK actually locked down 8 weeks ago, so it's not very long, but it seems like 3, 4, 5 years. But in reality, it's not that long, and how things change so very, very quickly. And I think it's also highlighted the interdependence that we had on travel. And again, it goes back to some of the challenges Dr. Sahu put to us, is about being international, about things working together. I mean, we're on a conference call now. I guess we're all on different makes of machine. I think you're on an Apple, Nitin, I'm on a Dell. But they all actually work and talk to each other. And that's really an important lesson around the valuation perspective, is about making sure that globally we can talk together and actually compare and the rewards. We've seen in America a process of lockdown, but then states coming out of it in different rates. But I was on a call to the US. I've been on a regular call with the US, and there's a real challenge around the marketplace and the funds, which have got a lot of money. There's a lot of liquidity out there, but they don't want to buy at the moment because of the risk. The valuers are still coming up with values which approximate the number that the seller would activate at. But the risk committees of the banks and the loan people are saying, we want a discount. If we're buying in this risky market that we don't know what's happening, we want a discount. And those discounts are ranging from about 20 to 25% on some assets, which is a phenomenal amount. Now, the challenge, and most of those deals are actually falling through because the sellers aren't distressed. They've got an asset and they say, well, if you're only going to be offering me that amount of money, I'm not going to sell. And until we get a leveling of that playing field and understanding of the risk. So America's sort of that end. The UK, we've got lots of complicated funds. And they've got lots of regulation around them. And so actually getting that balance right in that space is really difficult. Europe, we're waiting to see. But again, particular sectors of particular asset classes, hotels, anything which has actually got increased costs as well. So you can open up an office, but you've got increased costs in sanitization. And I think people are just sitting back at the moment and reassessing. But there's also this desperate built up demand to go and use the new norm.
Yeah, that's absolutely. And I think there's enough liquidity floating around anywhere, you look in the world. I mean, the central banks, have loosened their purse strings significantly, in these few weeks. So there's definitely going to be no shortage of liquidity. But you bring a very pertinent point here, Ben. So the gunpowder is being kept dry, but the shots are not being fired, so to say. Varun, if I may come to you on this one. We spoke earlier about some of the impairments, that may now become or rather come into consideration in the cases of various M&A deals and takeovers that maybe you and your firm was working on and others were working on. So how do you see that happen now, given that there is going to be liquidity around, especially if someone wants to leverage? There's going to be no shortage of that. So how are you looking to tackle that? And how are your clients actually looking to tackle that?
Sure. So we work with a large number of clients, and a lot of them have made mergers and acquisitions in the past, and those acquisitions are residing in their books with a significant amount of goodwill. Clearly in the last 2 or 3 months, what has happened in the financial markets is creating a triggering event. There is a clear case of the market prices having fallen dramatically, and that suggests that our clients should look at some of the goodwill that is residing on their books and see if there needs to be an impairment. And once again, nobody wants to take an impairment, right? I mean, most clients, if you ask them, will be very reluctant to record any kind of goodwill impairment. But we are seeing a slightly different trend this time. We are seeing a relatively higher propensity of clients to probably use this very unique circumstance to clean up their books to some extent, right? So do recognize the goodwill impairment. If there is an impairment, then let's not quibble about it. Let's recognize it, because once we've recognized it, the future is going to be much cleaner, right? We will not have to take any impairment 1 year down the line or 2 years down the line. Let's get it done with right now. And because everybody, all our investors, everybody understands what's going on, and therefore we will not be held terribly responsible. I think that's a very, very fresh and very positive things that we've seen with a bunch of our clients around.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that, Varun. Coming to you, Ajay, just following on from this, there are of course large investors, private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds who have significant investments in the country now, and of course you're part of a firm which does regular portfolio valuations for them. So what has your experience been, given of course you would have been working for the year end and March reporting as well. So how are you seeing this happen? Varun brought a very interesting point into play, saying that there is a propensity to actually look at this unique situation, to possibly clean up the books as well. Are you seeing that as well with the large players?
Yeah. So what? See, when we have to look at it in two distinct classes. One is the asset value, and one is the entity value, right? So when Varun is talking about, I'm assuming he's talking a lot about the entity value, and then the resultant impact across all the assets that you're recording in the balance sheet, right? So that's where the cleanup act is happening. Now, real estate assets, unfortunately, do not respond so quickly to these kind of trigger events, and that's one of the reasons why it becomes extremely difficult for us to also look at how a situation like COVID-19 will actually impair a real estate. So, for example, for the 45 days to 90-day lockdown that we've had in various parts of the world, it would be very unwise to say that the asset class value has deteriorated significantly because of this COVID-19 situation, because say, for example, commercial real estate, a lot of landlords are actually only talking about deferment of rental payments. They're not talking of writing of rental payments, or they're not talking about complete loss of revenue. So what we're actually looking at is you're only looking at the cash flows getting realized at a delayed point of time in future, and thereby whether that impairment requirement is to be significantly looked at a real estate level is a question. I would definitely agree. Impairment triggering cost will definitely happen at a plant and machinery level, because a lot of these plants that we're talking about, the industrial units, are all being idling for a significant amount of time. So you will look at functional obsolescence setting in. You might also look at, because the overall economic situation has deteriorated, the economic obsolescence actually having a significant impact on the overall value of the plant and machinery per se. So you're looking at the restatement of the fixed asset registers, if you have to see, and looking at the new net book values, it becomes the gross book values, and subsequently also looking at how the residual useful life of these assets need to be reconciled, given that they have idled for so long without any maintenance or without any kind of what I can say running. So
yeah,
these become an important point when you're looking at these asset classes. That's where we need to look at. We need to clearly look at asset class, and then we need to look at what purpose we are looking at for the impairment.
Great, and I think it was absolutely great for you to clarify that, because there has been, I won't say, people have been having concerns around asset values getting impacted. So I think you put it right into perspective that for such a short period, taking write downs on real estate portfolios, of course, it's not a very sensible strategy. So hopefully that should allay fears in the marketplace as well around that. I'm very, very conscious of the time we have, but I'm going to pick up one question, okay? Because as they always say that with every disruption, there's going to be an opportunity, and there have been various opportunities knocking on our doors in this, looking at this profession specifically. However, I don't think we've made enough progress on those. So Ben, let me bring you in. Given what we're going through right now and the challenges around, inspection, I mean, they may be temporary, they may actually change the way we work going forward. No one's to know for sure, but, what do you believe, is the future for, bringing automation into this profession? So, things like automated valuation models, big data, and at the end, really, I'd like you to address the fact that, is this reliance on technology, okay, going to help or hinder, the valuer? Because there's a lot of, consternation in the market around technology, being brought into the profession.
Sure. Yeah. No, Million-dollar question, Nitin. Thank you for passing that one to me. Technology is going to happen. It is happening. If we ignore it, then somebody else will come and take some of the roles that we already have. That's not to say that it's going to dominate the whole process. But if we go back to COVID and some of the challenges around inspection, what's happened in many countries is that the valuer has not been allowed to inspect. And this is a really interesting point for valuers, is inspection part of the valuation or not? Actually, when I've grown up and I've been in the profession for far too long, I expected to look at everything, and I collected the data I wanted, and I then applied that data to a methodology, which then gave me my valuation in my report. And I expected to do that whole linear process. Whereas actually, there are lots of people who are better at doing parts of that job than I am now. For example, and I think you touched on it earlier on, was that if I go into a new office block, actually all the M&E, all the electrical equipment, all the lifts and things, I've actually got very little idea about how they operate, etc. And I expect to see a passport, a building passport, which shows me when the lifts were serviced, whether they have got the relevant certificate with them, and all those bits which other people do. So we can rely on that information, but what we need to get is that certification process in place, which gives that reliance that I, as the valuer, can rely on the information I've been given. So, for example, we've had inspections being done for secured lending purposes of both residential and commercial properties with people using an iPhone. I can't find my phone at the moment, it's over here. So, the valuer has been sitting in their office, the occupier of the house or the security guard in the office has had the valuer on the telephone, and the valuer said, can you show me that left-hand corner, being on FaceTime, and shown them around the building. Now, it's not the same, but it's a way of capturing certain information. Whether that moves then totally into the automated position is a real challenge. And I think we need to look at it as being sort of sections. You can automate the systems you use to become more efficient. Doesn't mean to say that the number generated at the end is automatic. So there's still a process of valuation. And the IVFC have actually introduced some new requirements in this space, in effect in January this year, where the valuer is responsible for selecting any modelling which is used in the valuation process. So they've got to understand how that works, not the algorithm, but the principles which the model is based on. And that goes from everything from an Excel spreadsheet through to an automated valuation model. And just to give you a very quick example how technology is changing so rapidly. My wife has had 2 hip replacements, and she's a very clever lady. And about 6-7 years ago, she said, I can't vacuum clean anymore because of the twisting motion is painful. So I've been vacuum cleaning for the last 6 or 7 years our house. Now, I've been made redundant from that job because we've got a robot now which vacuums the house. Yeah. But what it does, it actually measures the house every week. It captures that information, it measures how big our rooms are, and transmits it up into the cloud. So we've got a vacuum cleaner manufacturer who is gathering very accurate data on the size of residential properties in the UK. And not only the UK, but around the globe. And if you start to think about the Internet of Things and how they all connect, the traditional way of measuring my house is probably redundant. So, big change.
But would you say, but in summation, would you say, would that really, cause the profession to rethink itself, or do you believe, as we spoke earlier, it can, used as an aid, rather than to actually, negate the valuer?
Yeah, I know, but it now means that if a valuer comes to my house, rather than having to use a tape measure or a laser, they can probably go straight onto the on the website, download all the sizes. They can probably tell what furniture I've got in here, and they'll be able to use that to compare other properties which they've also got an accurate measurement for. So it's a beta.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to bring this bit to a close. Maybe a final word from you, Ajay, on how do you see the technologies coming in?
Yeah, so I agree with Ben. So we need to be ready to accept that the technology is going to be the new frontier, that will be the new normal in our lives, and that valuation profession will also not be protected. It will have to look at how they incorporate this. Already we have significant amount of valuation calculators in place, evaluations automatically and deliver these reports. But what I think is that if people have a lot of concern about how these automated valuation models, the AVMs work, I think that they need to really look at the IAAO standards which are out there, which talk about how these valuation models need to be constructed.
Yeah.
And one of the significant things that I would like to put to all the valuation professionals there, my friends, is that we are not redundant in this process, because we are the people who give the inputs. So the inputs matter a lot, and in all the government promoted works, or where the sovereign promoted works, like in the European countries where AVMs have been adopted in a large way, again, there the valuers give a lot of inputs to these models to work, and and then deliver the output. And one of the important things that I also want to say that is that AVMs have a significant relevance when it comes to a mass valuation base. So when you're talking about computation of property taxes, or mortgage loans, valuation of collateral for mortgage loans, that's where they will be very, very relevant. But when you're coming to actually doing large valuations, which are high value valuations, then where specific inputs need to be really looked into, I think AVMs might only be helpful so much, and it's the valuer's decision and the what he thinks is the right assumption that goes in matters the most. And therefore, I don't think we'll be redundant, but yes, we need to be very, very clear. So if people want to just continue doing retail valuations, yes, they might be outdated, but I think it's also good for the profession, because then we are looking at all the entire mass of valuers actually looking to do better and moving up the value chain, and that's something that the profession is looking for.
Absolutely. And I think just to conclude it, really, we have to see that as an opportunity rather than as a threat, and really, mold ourselves to be part of that change, rather than resist, because I don't think any profession can say that they resisted change and they came out successful out of that. Coming to the second part of this discussion, Dr. Sahu was kind enough to give us a lot of time, address a number of issue a number of clarifications which have been brought to us both by our ICS professionals and members of the profession in a wide scale. So just starting with you, Ben, keep very, very conscious of the time, so we'll keep our answers brief from here on. You've had experience of looking at various geographies in your long career. You've seen countries move into setting up institutional frameworks for regulation of this profession. We've of course had challenges around it. Dr. Sahu addressed, as I said, a few. So just as an outlier, really, can you share your experience on how you've seen institutional frameworks for regulation of the profession actually come and develop this profession as a whole?
Yes, and I'll keep it brief, I promise, Nitin. I think it's really important just to say that these frameworks shouldn't be a threat to good valuers. Good valuers will be doing 99% of everything that is required within the bill already. The people who should be concerned are people who are operating at the margins of the profession, who perhaps aren't instigating the same ethical and processes which you'd expect a good valuer to undertake. If you look at the trust and the really important role that the valuer plays in an economy, Dr. Sahu referenced this. You know, that I might do a valuation for a secured lending purpose for a mortgage on a residential property. But that piece of paper then goes into the bank and becomes part of the loan portfolio of the book of that bank. And then that bank feeds into the central bank, and the whole process becomes a pyramid of responsibility. And the pyramid is only as strong as the weakest point. So having quality information to make better decisions is absolutely vital to all economies. And the introduction of international valuation standards or a regulatory framework which drives up the quality of the advice has had real impact on economies and made better decisions throughout the economy. So don't be scared of it, welcome it, embrace it, and the good valuers will benefit from that process.
Very well said, Ben. Thank you for outlining that for us. And I think, as you very rightly said, good valuers should never be scared of regulation being brought in. You know, Varun, coming to you, with your experience of being now part of this, you know, exercise, you've worked, you know, over the last couple of years, been part of a number of committees. You know, from your perspective, really, can you share with us, you know, how does this draft bill ensure that at its core, it addresses the regulation and development of the profession in India?
Sure. So I think one thing we must all recognize is that the valuation profession in India is an extremely complex profession. There are multiple regulations that are already impacting this profession, already governing this profession. And unfortunately, all of those regulations don't talk to each other, right? So a certain regulation requires a certain level of qualification. A certain regulation actually requires some net worth requirements also. Other regulations have completely different qualification requirements. So this entire bill has tried to sort of sue that very, very segmented or fragmented valuation profession together. It has given a platform which will give, which hopefully will give a much greater recognition and much greater respect to the valuation profession. It has set out entry norms, which will ensure that only people with at least a certain minimum qualification and a certain minimum understanding of valuation methodologies, as well as the laws and the economics that affects valuation, they have a basic minimum understanding of that before they actually come and provide valuation services to clients. And also, there is a very strong insistence on a code of ethics. As part of the training program, all valuers are being actually taught about what are the things that should be done and what are the things that should not be done. And I think all of that is going to help the entire valuation profession move up in society in terms of the respect that it enjoys. So I think given the circumstances, given the complexity of this profession in India, this bill is doing a massive, massive job.
Great, thanks for that perspective, Varun. I mean, I thought I'll cover, you know, the bit about the entry of firms, you know, that this bill, you know, allows. But Dr. Sahu was very forthright and very transparent about the, you know, the thought process and you know, and the approach that they've taken. So I don't think we'll spend a lot of time, given he addressed it in great detail. Coming to you, Ajay, you know, we've basically, you know, had actually a lot of reservations being expressed over the last few weeks, especially since the draft bill was put out for consultation. You know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, the imbalance between, you know, the fee levels that valuers typically, you know, receive vis-a-vis the risk they're taking in terms of penalties and things that are, you know, specified in the bill. Dr. Sahu's, you know, talked about a part of it, but Varun may remember during one of the committee of experts meeting, you know, as our ICS representative, I brought out the point about the, you know, the prevalence of professional indemnity insurance. So, you know, would you want to talk a bit about how, you know, the PII as it's known, can actually address or rather mitigate some of these risks, perceived risks that the valuation community is now looking at? And how is it done? Actually, I'll then come to Ben to talk about how PII works in some of the more mature markets and geographies. Yeah, to you, Ajay.
So we have noted that there has been significant amount of contraventions in the bill that a lot of people have been highlighting, and one of the most important aspects is the risk versus reward kind of a balance that we are talking in the bill. So we are all aware of the fact that the kind of penalties that are getting are likely to be levied once the bill becomes a law, and then what is the commensurate reward that a valuer actually is getting to do this. What we believe, this is my personal opinion, is that while we are looking at the risk part of it significantly in order to protect the users, also it is very important to protect the advisor, which is the valuer as well. Because Dr. Sahu was actually talking about looking at various laws and statutory bills that have been there in the past and taking a leaf out of them. Something that I would also suggest is that we need to really closely look at things like the Architects Act and everything, where certain minimum floor level fee is actually recommended because there is a significant risk for the person. Now, how I mean, it is only so much risk that a person will take if there is so much reward for him. So that's very important. And one of the important aspects that I think the bill really needs to address is the definition of a loss. How are you defining this term called loss, right? Who is the expert who is going to really determine what the loss is and how that loss can be attributed to the act of a valuer? That's significantly important, and that I think that requires a lot of thought, again, in terms of thinking through how we need to define that particular thing, because many a times, I mean, all of us have seen in practices that the valuer actually tries to do his work very diligently, but for the requirements of various commercial compulsions of the client, the client really looks at it a different way, the value he wants to look at. And there are valuers who actually uphold the ethics and they walk away from that. There are valuers who sometimes have to give in for various reasons. And in such kind of a scenario, who is actually perpetrating this loss because of a certain value that you're generating? That needs to be thought about, and we need to be fair to the advisor as well. With all due respect to the bill, I think the risk part has been addressed, but the reward part also has to be significantly there, because one of the important aspects of giving respect to a professional is also about the fact that how he's remunerated for his efforts.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
we all know how doctors get respect because of the fees they charge. So the more you charge, the more respect you get. So similarly, so I think valuers need to be given that.
Yeah. No, I'm going to take that strand to Ben. So Ben, very, very important point that the risk reward ratio really has to work, and that balance has to be attained. So in your experience in various mature markets and geographies, how has that risk reward really ratio played out for the valuation profession, and how has the presence of, or rather the practice to have PII mandatorily in some markets, as I am aware, has actually helped create that balance?
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. So I think AJ was very articulate in the way he responded in that space. I think it's really important that you see valuation as a risk management tool. The first question any valuer should ask when they get an instruction is, what is the risk? What is the risk to me as a valuer, and what is the risk to my client that I'm trying to mitigate? And that's the job. It's not putting a number on, it's that risk management process. The liabilities can be limited or capped. So again, making sure that the instruction letter covers all the relevant parts is really important. And if you can legally impose a limitation on your liabilities, then that needs to be made clear both in the instructions but also in the report, and agreed with your client so that everybody understands what they are paying for. It's a transaction. It's about buying and selling a service. And we will only be employed if we're providing value for money, and we're helping the value. But I also think there's a two-pronged part of this as well, which is there's the valuation, but then there's also valuation advice. And we need to be clear which bit is which, but which part are you complying to the regulations or the law on the valuation, and then which bit is, well, actually, as an advisor, I would provide this advice to you to move forward. So that's a critical part.
Right.
Professional indemnity insurance helps to understand that cover of loss and give the client the thought that if something does go wrong, I'm not got to sue Ben Elder as an individual who may have gone bust. I can get recompense from the insurance company. So it's a same sort of process as a motor insurance or anything else, but it does have its drawbacks.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's a discussion we can keep for another time, because there's no free lunch anywhere in the world. The insurance companies aren't just going to pay up. But that just brings me to actually a very hotly debated piece in the bill, and that's really around the provisions which are there in the draft bill towards the admissibility of valuation reports under the Indian Evidence Act. We've been inundated with questions today during the session, as well as before when we asked for these questions, is where people have said that there is very regularly a difference, between the reported values and the actual saleable value of of real assets, that is property assets. So when you read it alongside the provision which says that you've got to be able to justify your valuation in a court of law under the Indian Evidence Act, Varun, I'm going to put this to you. How do you really see this working in this case?
So we've had some discussions with a of lawyers, and we've tried to understand. So under the Indian Evidence Act, fortunately, the Act does not prescribe any liabilities or penalties for the expert. I mean, Section 45 of the Act kind of defines an expert and then says that the evidence of an expert can be relied upon by the court in certain circumstances. So that's what it specifies. But it is not saying that if you're, if you've provided a valuation report and then that valuation report gets used in court, and if there are some errors or mistakes in that report, that you will be held liable. At least that risk is not there. However, see, when we carry out a valuation, and if we are aware that the valuation will be used in a court of law, the level of diligence that goes into such a valuation process, the amount of internal review that we carry out of such a valuation, and the very format in which we produce such a valuation report is very different from a valuation report that we are producing for a financial reporting purpose, for example, or a Foreign Exchange Management Act reliance purpose. So for that reason, I believe that inserting this clause can increase the level of scrutiny through which each and every valuation report can potentially go through, and it can therefore increase the cost of delivery of the valuation report, which might ultimately either not be beneficial for the profession or might not even be beneficial for the user of the report. Customer, because the profession will start charging higher accordingly, right? I mean, if I know that my report can be produced in court, then I will have to present myself in court and defend that report. It adds to my cost of doing business, and therefore I will try to charge that to my users. So I think we should probably work with the committee and probably provide feedback that this clause be there, but only in limited circumstances and not for each and every valuation.
Absolutely, very well said. Thank you for that. Very conscious that we're already 2-3 minutes almost now over time, but I'm going to keep one last question here, I've tried to cover, some of the questions that have been posed by the audience, but unfortunately, I've not been able to due to lack of time. But I hope you understand, and we'll try to get back to you with the answers to those separately. But the one last question I want to bring up, and I'll start again, this one with you, Varun. Or rather, let me first, go to Ben. So Ben, we've been having a lot of work that's been undertaken on the, development of Indian valuation standards. Varun has been part of the committee of experts set up to actually draft Indian valuation standards, and they are being referred to in this draft bill as well. In your experience, really, rather, I remember some of our discussions in the past that you don't need to define standards, or they're not a necessary thing to have. But from your perspective, Ben, what role really do standards play in keeping the profession streamlined, and giving relevant guidance to the professionals?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Again, I'll keep this short, Najid. I chair one of the boards for the International Valuation Standards Council. So, and it's about creating a transparency through the process of doing evaluation. So there's a story that can be told, and you can justify your judgments at each and every point. But the really important thing is that if you've had a valuation which is done to an international standard, then it doesn't matter whether the consumer is in America or in India or in China, they know what they're getting, and they can get a valuation, because a pension fund might be buying a piece of real estate in London or Delhi or Mumbai or New York, and they don't want to spend time trying to adjust the local valuation standards, a bit like the International Financial Reporting Standards. If you've got a set of accounts which is prepared to the International Financial Reporting Standards, or very close to, you can make an immediate comparison between them. If they're done on different bases, then you have to your client has to spend some time, and therefore money, costs, in translating them into one to the other. And that's a waste of time and money and resources. So let's bring the whole process together and just get a basic understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great way to put it. And so Varun, as I mentioned, we're aware that you've been part of the valuation standards drafting committee. I'm not very certain if you are at the liberty of sharing the progress made there in an open forum. But if you are able to, if you can just brief us really the work that's happened on that, and the direction that we as a country are taking under this bill towards having Indian valuation standards in place.
Sure. Yeah. So I will share what I can, and will not go through everything, all the deliberations of the committee. But to summarize, the standard setting committee had extensive consultation across India with a large number of valuation professionals. And what we figured out was that all Indian valuation professionals were already using international valuation standards, even if they were not expressly saying so. If they were carrying out valuation under certain laws like the Stamp Duty Act or the like the Indian Stamp Act or certain provisions of the Indian Income Tax Act, there are certain prescriptions under those acts around how to carry out a valuation, and they are following those prescriptions. But where there is no prescription by any given law, all Indian valuers are using effectively international valuation standards, even if they are not stating that. So the recommendation of the standard setting committee has been, and that recommendation has already been made to the government, the recommendation has been that international valuation standards be adopted by India, subject to any departures which are necessary in order to comply with local laws and regulations. So that has already been done. The government is seized of this matter, and we are hoping that once the valuation bill goes through, then that recommendation will also be operationalized.
Great, and from my experience and knowledge, I think that's exactly how globally markets operate, because no valuation standard or guidance can ever override the local legislation. So you have to make specific departures and allowance for the same. Ajay, what's your experience been really working in the Indian market, towards utilizing best practice standards in your, of course, previous roles as well as now as part of Colliers?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Varun. Like the well-organized valuers, be it individuals or firms or companies, they really are actually following the international valuation practices, and they follow the IVSC to a large extent, and a lot of RICS guidance is taken into account. I mean, I was quite surprised, in fact, pleasantly surprised that many of the recent valuation reports that have come out actually do contain a disclaimer on the valuation uncertainty, as provided by guidance either by IVSC or by RICS, by most valuers. So that shows that there is a significant amount of learning that's already happened for the international valuation standards. And I think that it is only for the betterment of this profession that, like Ben was saying, that you really need to have one standard that you can follow across the globe. Of course, providing for specific departures to the local legislation, and we have people who, and when valuers are registered with statutory bodies where the specific departures are happening, they're aware of the international standards. It's just that probably because of the work volume that they're actually doing under the specific departure, they might not be really using these standards. But yeah, I think everybody actually knows what it is, and of course, most of the academic institutions that now people are going to, and the MEP programs that the RVOs are carrying out, is actually promoting this in a big way, and therefore I think it's a good thing for the market.
Great, and I think that really brings us, to the end of this discussion. Reason being, I can see already we are 12 minutes past time. There are so many questions that I'm getting, from the audience, but unfortunately, we did not have the time to take them. But we assure you that we will endeavor to get answers posted, on our website along with a recording of this video session. And again, as I started this conversation with, I'll again encourage you to visit the RICS website and see the RICS guidance, around. We've covered some, very important points. And of course, Ben has been a key part in delivering that, around material uncertainty clauses, the disclosure requirements, reliance on information from third parties, guidance on how market value and worth needs to be looked at by valuers. So all this guidance is available to the profession across the globe. We welcome and encourage you to visit our website. Of course, Mr. Sao is not here to receive our thanks, but we are extremely grateful for the time he gave us today. The detail and the depth he went into to discuss the intent and the objectives of the bill. I'm hoping that has allayed many concerns, amongst the members of the profession, that the bill is looking at a positive outcome for members of the profession, and having a competitive marketplace really is necessary for the development of the profession. And as I spoke with Ben yesterday, and he mentioned very rightly, it's only when the profession develops that the members of that profession will develop as well. So let's all look forward to a positive outcome, and I'll encourage you, both RICS members as well as non-members, to visit the MCA portal and share their comments on the bill again, as Dr. Sahu has been repeatedly requesting us. So at the end, thank you very much, my fellow panelists, Ben, Varun, and Ajay, and thank you to the audience really for patiently listening to us for the best part of 2 hours. We hope you enjoyed these discussions. Please be in touch with us, and we'd be more than happy to support you in case you require any clarifications for matters pertaining to the profession. Thank you again, and with this, we'll close this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.